The next poem we are going to look at is John Donne's The Sun Rising. Like the previous poem, The Flea, this is also a poem in 3 parts with 3 stanzas, but unlike the previous one, the stanzas are not of 9 lines, but rather of 10. And there's some regularity to them, but there's also considerable irregularity, certainly in terms of the number of feet per line. And so although it begins with an A, B, B, A structure, and then moves to C, D, C, D, and then before concluding with a rhyming couplet, there's considerable variation within the lines, such that it is breaking with the rhythm all the time. The topic of the sun rising is obviously something that happens on a daily basis, but it is, as we have seen already, the sun is connected with cosmology, in addition to being what we associate it with, which is simply the sunlight. Has connotations of perfection because the symbol of alchemy in that system is a circle with a dot in the middle, and a symbol of perfection thereby, just like the concentric spheres of the Ptolemaic cosmology are. I have suggested from the beginning that we need to read these poems with both the idea of a microcosm and macrocosm in mind. So everything that's said of a small object will also have connotations for larger objects and ultimately metaphysical objects. So read on at least 3 levels. And we will find that is true here as well in this particular poem, The Sun Rising. I'm going to read it and then I will comment on it. Let me share my screen with you, and then you can read along with me if you want. So this is The Sun Rising by John Donne. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run? Saucy, pedantic wretch, go chide late schoolboys and sour prentices. Go tell court huntsmen that the king will ride. Call country ants to harvest offices. Love, all alike, no season knows nor clime, nor hours, days, months, which are the rags of time. Thy beams, so reverend and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink, but that I would not lose her sight so long? If her eyes have not blinded thine, look, and tomorrow late tell me whether both the Indias of spice and mine be where thou left'st them, or lie here with me. Ask for those kings whom thou sawest yesterday, and thou shalt hear all here in one bed lay. She's all states, and all princes I. Nothing else is. Princes do but play us. Compared to this, all honors mimic, all wealth alchemy. Thou, son, art half so happy as we, in that the world's contracted thus. Thine age asks ease, and since thy duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us. So shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy center is, these walls thy sphere. All right, so as we can see here, the object concerned is once again a pair of lovers, just as we saw last time with the flea. And the relations between the 2 lovers are going to have correspondences. And there are going to be varieties of types of love and varieties of types of light and varieties of types of worlds for that matter, which we can also see going back to the First Anniversary, where he was lamenting the loss of a young woman, Elizabeth Drury, a 14-year-old, who he compared to the loss of a whole world, and then went on to make all manner of implications from that in accordance with the correspondences that he saw between everything in accordance with their particular hierarchies. So once again, at the highest level, the correspondence between heaven and earth. At the political level, between a king and his subjects, and at the individual level between reason and passions. But there are additional variations on that theme in the sense of understandings of what love is and hierarchies there. Now, nobody speaks of this more adequately than C.S. Lewis in his work, The Four Loves, where he talks about four types of love, but these happen to be also degrees of love. He starts with storge, the familial love, then moves on to friendship, philia, before moving on to erotic love, eros, before finally concluding with agape, which is the love of God. And as I say, there is a hierarchy there. Each one of them is corresponds to the other, but the highest, because we live in a hierarchical worldview, is the most important and most influential. But that does not say that the others are not resemblances of it and cannot be compared to it. And Donne is delighting in his poetry in making those comparisons in unlikely ways, and certainly not in theologically intentional ways, in ways that are typical of the Renaissance focus on the individual and the importance of the individual. Now, he does it tongue in cheek. I don't think we are to take too much or make too much of these sorts of resemblances, but he does delight in it himself, and he indulges in it repeatedly in his poetry. And just doing a brief scan over several of his poems, we'll start to see certain consistent tendencies on Donne's part that are in keeping with the Elizabethan world picture that I outlined in the first few lectures. So as I say, he begins here in the first stanza. Let me go back to it here. Busy old fool, unruly sun. A very strange way to address the sun. But of course, just like in the flea, we have a specious form of argumentation here. It's not meant to be taken too seriously, but the sun, which is the light by which reasoning sees, the eye sees, is here seen to be foolish, as if it were blind, and as if it were the center around which they are revolving rather than the other way around. So once again, he is implicitly referring to two different cosmologies, one in which the earth is at the center, and in this case, it will be the bed of the two lovers, and the other in which the sun is at the center and the planets revolve around it. So Donne is implying that the tension between those two cosmologies here in this poem, for which reason I think that this poem is written later than 1610 with Galileo's discoveries. I think there's an implicit reference to varied cosmologies here, which would necessitate that he has that in mind. Now, it's not that that cosmology doesn't exist before, but it certainly doesn't come to the attention and the prominence that we see after Galileo, where it becomes very, very much important indeed. So I can't prove this, but it seems to me that this is probably after 1610. But having said that, we don't know, because the poems are published posthumously, and we're not told exactly what was written and when. And I don't think scholars have yet come to any determination on that fact, but I'm not 100% certain of that. But what I am certain of is the relations that lie in it and the use of language. Now, once again, I talked about the structure of each verse or stanza, and the way in which we see patterns emerging there. And there's a structure, and roughly speaking, there's a rhyme scheme going on here. And so there's order that comes with that, an explicit ordering in the poem, which reflects the orderly cosmology that Donne will in fact hold to. Having said that, he breaks his rhyme and his meter regularly, which much to the consternation of Ben Jonson, the classicist. We're going to come to the school of the tribe of Ben and the classicists later on, as just as a way of a foil for our metaphysical poets who comprise the majority of the course. But he breaks his own meter, and he does so intentionally. It's not that he can't keep meter if he chooses to do so. It's because he intentionally breaks it. Now, what does that connote? Well, my guess is that it connotes the very same thing that we saw in the clash between the two cosmologies. One suggests order and rhythm and perfection, and the other suggests disarray and discord and perhaps sin. And Donne is happy to employ these two contraries regularly in his poetry, and he does it in every conceivable sense, including the metrical sense. For which reason, as I say, Johnson thought that he deserved to be flogged, because Johnson, being the classicist, thought that the order ought to be paramount, and he ought to reflect that in the economy of phrasing and the choice of phrasing. He was not of T.S. Eliot's opinion that Donne was in fact perfect in his choice of the vehicles for his expression, the metonyms and so forth. But here he begins by addressing the sun, and the sun is presented as an interloper here, intruding upon the reality, which is the two of those, the two of the lovers lying on their bed. And he is saying that it is not observing the right hierarchy, which is the hierarchy that he has over the sun. So there's an inversion of the hierarchy there, from the heaven and the earth, or from the planets to the earth, the celestial spheres to the earth. Likewise, to the individuals on the earth, they are seen as the center of the whole cosmos. And so it is the blasphemous one, because it shoots its rays through the windows and through the curtains. And he challenges the sun for having to, for suggesting that they have to work in accordance with its rhythms, its seasons, rather than the other way around. And he wants to suggest that their time is exactly that. It's their time. It's not the time according to which he has to operate. They are phoenixes, to use the phrase that he suggested in the First Anniversary. He sees them as individuals, and the individuals are of primary importance, as unlike the sun, which is just busy, old, foolish, and unruly. So that's the opening gambit. He asks it a variety of questions. He's interrogating it. It's interrupting him. So he is giving it back a little bit here. Even calls it a saucy, pedantic wretch, and tells them basically to leave them alone, and speaks of himself in terms of being a king, and the king will ride. And there's a little bit of, again, play on words here, rather rude, I suspect. But by all means, order and boss around the lesser creatures, the ants, the boys, the apprentices. By all means, do your duty with them, but don't think that you have any sort of moral authority or any other authority over us, which are merely the rags of time. So by suggesting that the sun works in accordance with the limitations, or under the limitations of time, he's suggesting that they have a sort of a immortality about them, an eternity. This is a theme that he will return to, as we shall see later on, in an allegory, Forbidding Morning. I've just drawn a blank on what I was thinking there. He goes back to the sunlight, however, which he began the whole exercise with. Thy beams so reverend, so worshipful, and strong, why shouldst thou think? How dare you interrupt us? I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink. I close my eye and the sun's beams are gone. That's the control. That's the power he has. He's the true monarch here. The sun works in accordance with his dictates, not the other way around. But that I would not lose her sight so long. If her eyes have not blinded thine, note when you look to the sun that you're blinded by the light there. He's suggesting the light is emitted from her eyes. Now, there is an understanding of optics in Donne's day that this is exactly how light does work, that the beams actually come from a person's eyes. I won't get into that there, but that's the understanding of optics and how we see that light comes from us by which we can see, rather than our understanding that there's a lens there and a retina and then the brain and all that, which processes the information that comes through the light. Their understanding is that there are eye beams that go out. You will see that more specifically when we come to the poem, The Ecstasy. But here he suggests that rather than the sun being the source of light, that she is the source of light. And so he's turning everything around here. And then he's going to compare her once again to a world. And in this case, a place on the other side of the world, and her body being just like the body of the globe. So the Indias, the two Indias, the East Indies and the West Indies, West Indies being in the Caribbean, the East Indies being the place that we now call India. The India of the East Indies will be the Indias of spice, where the spice trades comes from, Bengal and so forth. So they go up around the Cape of Good Hope to the south of South Africa towards India, and mine probably the gold mines that will be found in the West Indies, or the silver mines. So both Indies far removed from where Donne is writing this poem in England. So look, and tomorrow late, tell me whether both the Indies of spice and mine be where thou left'st them, or lie here with me, because she is wearing perfume and she's wearing gold or silver or some sort of precious metal on her. Ask for those kings whom thou sawest yesterday, and thou shalt hear all here in one bed lay. So she is the true world. Once again, he's saying, again, the comparison goes back to the one that he made in the First Anniversary. Finally, the third stanza. She's all states and all princes I. So there's a representation here. They are a microcosm, not only of the world, but they are representative of states, and he of kings in that sense. There's a political appropriation here for the two of them. Nothing else is. Princes do but play us. Remember, I talked about the Elizabethan theater, the Globe Theater, tellingly named Globe Theater, where it said that all the world's a stage. And that's how he is conceptualizing this here. The princes do but play us. We're not playing the prince, they're playing us. We are the prime example, and they are following our example. And compared to this, all honors, mimic, all wealth, alchemy. Alchemy being the means by which one can create gold from other matter, the supposed science of alchemy. Goes back to it, but he speaks to the sun, and he speaks to it in intimate terms, however. It's not distant. Thou, sun, art half as happy as we, in that the world's contracted thus. The whole world is here in miniature, but in its fullest sense is in the two lovers lying on the bed. But she in particular, says he, thine age asks ease, and since thy duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy center is, these walls thy sphere. Now referring back at the very end to the Ptolemaic cosmology. The bed is now contemplated as being the earth. Remember the geocentric cosmology of Ptolemy, and the sun is one of the concentric spheres that resides around it, and that's how it is being seen. So it is revolving around them, and therefore the earth is at the center. Now remember, Donne is not, he's using the argumentation here speciously for the purposes of fun and wit, playing with the resemblances as it delights him, and finding new correspondences and ways of casting the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm. But that is my understanding here of what Dr. Donne is doing in this great poem and little poem, The Sun Rising. I think it's relatively straightforward, particularly when you take on board what I've said already about the Elizabethan world picture and the way it plays out in various ways in particular in relation to the lovers and degrees of love, etc. I'll leave it there and see you for the next lecture.